We're going to get started. All right, thanks so much everyone for joining us in our second training session. I'd like to first off start that we had a excellent response from our first training session. I know we had some people coming in and asking us questions regarding about training, just briefly about it, but also about questions about the provincials coming up next weekend, and as well as the multiple choice question testing this coming weekend, which will provide more information at the end of this session. But otherwise, we're going to get started on our second one. This time we have Michael Prasad, our VP of Operation, as well as Prisa Kazra joining together. Oh, sorry, the VP of Training, forgot your positions. Also joining us in this call and will be assisting us today on answering any additional questions you may have. Some of the questions either you might have missed from the first training session or any other questions that you guys want to follow up on from our first training sessions, and as well any other additional questions in terms of the provincial, such as what's going to happen during the check-in, the weekend itself, and as well as the multiple choice testing coming up this weekend as well too. So just to get started here, just bear with me for a few seconds. All right, so this time we have a set agenda, so we're going to try to keep this call or this session as minimal as possible. But we're going to try to get into detail to every single point as well. So and as well, anything that we need to add into this call, I believe Michael Prasad as well, Prisa Kazra, is going to add into this call as well too. So we're going to go from an agenda that we have created during the day. So firstly, to start with, we're going to start with our KPIs. So basically, those are key performance indicators. So for this part of the session, I'm going to get Michael and Prisa to kind of expand on this here as well too. So I'm going to get you guys to expand on this if you can, because I know I see them, they're in a public place. Just bear with us a few seconds here. Oh, okay, hold on. Okay. Yeah, they're in a public place at the moment. It's going to be a bit too loud, but I'll try my best to kind of interpret of what they're saying, but I'll also put in a little bit of my own experience as well too. So starting off for our first part of our session, we're going to talk about the KPI, as I mentioned, the key performance indicators. So first off, KPIs are essentially like your rubric in a way as well, of how to actually tackle your specific case, regardless if you're doing an individual or a team category as well too. So the key performance indicators will just guide you on exactly what you're trying to not only solve, but what kind of recommendations you would recommend in that are relations to your solutions as well too, and that in the end, as I mentioned in the first session, will solve your problem in the specific case. So one of the basic parts of the parts of your key performance indicator are using keywords when you're mentioning about it as well too. So if you mention keywords in your presentation to your judge and everything, it will kind of support your idea as well as you're achieving your key performance indicators when you're trying to say it. So for example, just reading off from the agenda we have here. So it says here, for example, build the product or the services brand. So it's essentially when you're trying to say this, when you're talking about this, you want to talk about regards to the product's brand or any relationship. How are you going to be able to build this brand? So you have to set specific indicators of how you'll be able to reach the specific recommendations as well too. So be sure to make sure that you also have it outlined as a rubric as well too. We're going to get back into key performance indicators, obviously more into details. This is just a brief explanation of what it is, because all of this will eventually tie in together how you'll be able to kind of combine it, because even though we have a lot of tips, a lot of techniques that you can use to analyze or even develop recommendations, you can only use so much, or you can try to condense them and try to kind of bend them together and kind of merge them together to make an excellent recommendation when you're doing your case and stuff. So the second part of it, what we also want to mention as well too, that I briefly also mentioned in the first session as well too, is always have some sort of agenda. So going back to about explaining of the gap analysis as well as starting off with GNAP and kind of having some sort of a flow into it, it's always a good idea to provide some sort of agenda as well too, what you're going to explain to your judge. Now, it doesn't have to be in detail. I know some people kind of want to use an agenda. Not many people want to use an agenda, but if you at least to some extent explain to your judge what you're going to mention, like either, for example, not even just telling your problem, but also mentioning your three or four or how many numbers of recommendation and how it ties back into the problem and answers the solution. That's the key point as well too. And obviously, having some sort of agenda or some ways of explaining what you're going to tell your judge is essentially like a roadmap. It gives the judge a sense of some sort of a vision, some sort of something, a mental picture that you're going to explain to them, and they can kind of imagine what you're trying to say. So this assists them in trying to understand your meaning, not only your reasoning, but also what you're trying to interpret in terms of your recommendation to the judge as well too. And also, lastly, make sure that your agenda, excuse me, is also part of your KPI, so your key performance indicators. Make sure they always relate back to it, as I mentioned. Also make sure it relates to the recommendations that you're going to offer, because in the end, all this has to tie in together, and it has to have some sort of a flow. Because although you're just trying to say all your ideas or your recommendation, if you don't really have a flow in when you're presenting your case, it might seem like it's just going to be out of line. It might just get thrown off. Sometimes your judge may get confused. You might get confused as well too when you try to explain it or even answering the questions at the end of your case presentation. So be sure to have some sort of agenda, because it gives you some sort of flow when you're presenting and gives you some sort of a structure how you'll be able to explain your recommendation and how it ties into the specific problem of the case and how it answers your solutions. So going into the actual presentation of your case, going to detail this time, as I mentioned from the first session, obviously you're going to do your intro. So obviously we mentioned last time about GNAP, so your greeting, your name, your association, and your purpose as well too. So as I mentioned before, giving you a greeting. So for example, like the handshake, most cases you only need to shake their hands at least 2 times, no more than that. Just make sure it's a nice firm handshake, that you are kind of interpreting confidence when you handshake or doing your handshake. Nothing that's too limp. A lot of the judges have always talk about it at the end as well too, and a lot of networkers in networking sessions have always complained about some delegates or some students who always kind of offer limp handshakes. So try to make sure when you shake your hand that you're shaking it, that you're trying to interpret confidence, not really nervousness. Like, I know it's normal to be nervous, but try to kind of eliminate that as best you can and try to interpret confidence when you're meeting the judge for the first time. And then when you're going on to the end portion of the GNAP, so this is part where you're talking about your name and then also tying in a little bit your association, the A portion. So once again, mentioning from the last session as well too, you need to read your case carefully and read the part what your specific role is and the specific role of the judge as well too. So as I mentioned, the two types, either it could be an external role or an internal role. So for example, if you are a financial analyst and you're reporting to your manager, for example, if you're using the GNAP portion and the N and the A portion, you really don't have to mention your name, your position and stuff like that, because as I mentioned in the first session, you're kind of already an internal employee with your manager. They kind of already know who you are and your position, that sort of thing. So you really don't have to really mention your name and your position. However, if you're more of an external role, if it says in the case, then you'll need to start explaining your role, your association as well. You have to mention your name, right? Because you have to take into factor that in this role, because it's external, the judge essentially does not know you, and you're meeting him literally for the first time, he or she for the first time. So you'll need to mention your name in the association. For example, in the agenda we have here, so you come in to the judge in your external role. So after you shake your hand, you say, "Hi, my name is Kevin," for example, and I am a senior consulting for X company or whatever sort, right? And you want to just explain the association or your the company in a way. And then eventually later on, you'll move on to the P portion, which is the purpose. So that, regardless if it's internal or external, you have to mention exactly your point of meeting this judge. You're here for a reason, right? So putting yourself in your shoes of it, essentially you're trying to say that, for example, if you're an internal employee, your purpose is, for example, I have to report back to you because you told me to do some sort of financial analysis on I don't know, a purchase of something, for example. Or let's say if you're an external role, if you're a consultant and everything, it's like, hi, you hired us to do some consulting because you also wanted to improve on your management skills as well as your efficiencies in running your business, that sort of thing. Explain the reason why you are here based off the case and based off your specific role. That's the P portion of the GNAP. So recapping about GNAP, the greeting, essentially saying hi, how are you, smiling. Don't forget to smile. I mentioned this in the first session. A lot of people always forget about this. You have to smile. You have to show confidence and show enthusiasm, but not overdo it. Bottom line is show confidence because you want to make sure that when you're trying to sell your idea or your recommendation, you have to show it in a way that your judge is going to be able to accept it, but embrace it and be happy about it. So if you don't smile, you don't seem confident, that's already starting on the wrong foot. Let's leave it at that. And obviously the handshake, make sure it's about at least two handshakes, no more than that. Make sure it's nice, firm, and confident. Don't make it limp, that sort of a thing. Be confident no matter how bad your idea could be, even if you couldn't think of an amazing idea within the 15-minute or 30-minute preparation time, just show confidence and be proud of what you have, at least at this point. You never know. Your idea can be great. You just could be overthinking it. And then the end portion, which is your name. So obviously mentioning your name, if it's external kind of a role, but also if it's an internal kind of role, you really don't need to mention it. So be mindful of your role. Your association, same thing. If it's external, you do need to mention it. Internal, not too much. You don't have to go into much details and stuff. And then lastly is the P portion, which is the purpose. Regardless if it's internal or external, you will need to at least explain to your judge, why are you here? Why did you send me? Why did you call me in the first place? There's a purpose for me to be here with you. So explain that as your purpose. Explain that, oh, I'm here because of blah, 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 X, Y, and Z. Simple as that. After you've done your intro, and once again, mentioning from the first session, the intro should not take more than 15 to 30 seconds at all. You're just quickly explaining your name, your social, that sort of thing. You shouldn't take too long about it because don't forget, you have 10 minutes to present and 15 minutes to present if you're doing teams, 10 minutes for individuals. So you don't have that much time to get your point across, even if you've written it on paper. So make sure you use your time wisely when you present. And once again, reiterating from the first session, there is no timer in front of you when you're preparing and when you're presenting. So you're timing yourself, you're kind of timing in your head, you're kind of feeling it in a way. So you need to kind of guess how much time you have, but at the same time, you really need to know how to manage your time as well too. So we'll explain in more detail about that. But moving on to the portion of your actual presentation of your case. So going back into the KPIs, the agendas, that sort of thing. Best to start is the agenda after your GNAP. So obviously, like I mentioned earlier, kind of giving a brief explanation of what you're going to be explaining to your judge, that sort of thing. So the first thing is always mentioning your problem, right? As your purpose is, why are you here, why are you mentioning. Also mention and retell the problem, right? You have to tell your judges like, okay, so I understand we have a situation that we're not getting enough sales, blah, 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 blah. Our accountings, the way we're doing our accounting is not up to GAAP standards or IFRS standards, or be doing a retail marketing thinking that, okay, we have a situation where we need to gain more market share, whatever the case is. You always need to retell your problem just so the judge understand that you are aware of what's going on. And then once you mention your problem, then you start leading into your solution, essentially kind of explaining what you're trying to solve this problem about. So whatever your solution is, or if it's mentioned in a case, which is most likely the case, mention the solution. It could be there, or you have to make your own. But make sure when you're making stuff up, BSing as we would like to call it a lot, you have to BS properly in a way that you can back up yourself with, right? We'll explain more in detail about that portion in the end. But after that, once you mention your solutions, you have to mention your recommendations. So once again, questions been thrown out, retelling from the first session that some have asked, how many recommendations should we have in when you're doing your case? And my answer is normally there is no set number because there shouldn't be really a set number, but mainly you shouldn't have like one recommendation or only two recommendations. On average, you should have 2 to 3, maybe 4, depending on the case. But on average, most people will put the 3. Not only you don't have enough time to really think of that many recommendations, it's more about can you really go into detail about that explanation? And does that recommendation relate back to your problem? Does it solve the problem? And does it also relate to your solution in terms of solving the problem? So when you're doing your recommendations, be mindful about not necessarily how many you put in there. It's about your recommendations. So as the saying goes, quality over quantity. Just be mindful of that as well too. So that the agenda part should only take about, let's say, a minute, minute and a half, not even. So doing all that and everything, your first whole portion of it is only 2 minutes maximum. So your GNAP is only about 30 seconds maximum, and then your agenda should be about a minute, not even a minute 30. I think I might be stretching it a bit, but a minute, minute 30. So a minute 30 to 2 minutes is literally your whole beginning portion. The rest of your presentation is when you really start to explain your recommendation and sell your ideas off. So before I go into the recommendation part, we'll move back into the preparation portion about building your recommendation, that sort of thing. So depending on the case that you're doing, obviously there's different types of categories. Some of them are primarily in the marketing sector, the management sector, the consulting, accounting, finance, whatever the case may be. Each case, the way you analyze it and the way you kind of develop your recommendations are always different. They're never the same. So for example, taking in, let's say, let's pull in retail marketing, for example. Retail management, most of the cases that you get are either essentially trying to sell a product, build market share, that sort of thing. So when you're developing a recommendation in this case, put some marketing component into play, but also put a little bit of psychology into play because retail, if you think about it, does involve some sort of psychology involved. There's a reason why people buy products. People come to your store and buy products, right? It's all a psychological thing. So there's a reason why. So always putting that in. So some of the business students who've taken this course, consumer behavior, that really plays a role when you're doing, let's say, for example, a retail management case. So when you're developing your recommendation, put that into factor, start developing ideas that will really get the judges kind of engaged about it, make them attracted to your recommendation, say that your recommendation is better than the guy next to you or the team next to you, or it's the one that will definitely stand out when they always deliberate at the end. So next thing, for example, if you're doing like some sort of a mathematical recommendation. Let's take accounting, for example, because I know a lot of accounting students have always asked this question and how they always say that, how is accounting in terms of recommendation different than, say, if you're doing a marketing or management course? Accounting is definitely different, and also BFS, business financial services, is slightly different because since those two categories are essentially mathematical categories, when you're doing recommendation, there's no such thing as like, okay, which idea is the best? It's almost in a way where there's only one answer. So taking accounting, for example, accounting is always based off your GAAP, making sure that the company follows their GAAP. For example, they're following IFRS, ASPE if they have, that sort of a thing, making sure they're following guidelines in Canada, for example, because sometimes the case may be from the United States, but obviously we're going to be using Canadian GAAP, Canadian standards. So going to the point, making sure when you're doing your answers, it has to be correct. Sometimes you might have a recommendation that in terms of explaining gaps to your judge and something like that, because it could be mentioned in the case. Obviously, everyone will interpret it differently, but as long as you're explaining it and it relates back to specifically the part of the gap. For example, if you're trying to explain what a revenue recognition is, it doesn't have to be so technical. It doesn't have to be exact in a way. As long as you explain it in a way that it relates to what revenue recognition is, then it's fine. But in terms of when you're trying to do a mathematical recommendation, or it tells you in the case that you're supposed to create a balance sheet, an income statement, cash flow statement, that sort of thing, obviously you have to be right on this. There can't be any errors on this stuff. So anyone doing accounting categories and stuff like that, definitely, I highly recommend you go back into your textbooks or your notes from whichever courses you've taken, review your courses, or review your textbooks and review your notes. Make sure you know them off by heart because as you remember that when you're doing this competition, accounting is an individual in this case, that you only have 15 minutes to prepare your case. So think about it, tying that in, plus that you might have to do a balance sheet, an income statement, cash flow statement, something like that. You're gonna have to do that in 15 minutes. Depending on the case, it could be big, it could be long, it could be nice and short, whatever the case may be mindful of your time and really know that off by heart. As well, know your gaps, know your restrictions and stuff like that. Now for business financial services, I haven't really done that personally, so I'll try my best to kind of explain it, but I know Michael Prasad has done that many, many times, even though he's done also the sports and entertainment category as well too. But when you're doing business financial services, and I'm going to try to explain it generally, as I mentioned in the first session of how to tackle certain cases, but let's say for BFS, knowing your specific definitions, the concepts of finance and stuff like that. So any third year students have taken finance and about to take corporate finance in the winter semester coming up next week, essentially reviewing those notes, looking into it, and kind of memorizing as well, because you're going to have to take all those concepts and apply it in this case into analyzing your case when you're developing a recommendation. And this goes for all case categories as well too. You're essentially taking essentially what you learned at GH or what you've also researched online to expand on your knowledge and applying it in this case when you're reviewing your case and developing recommendations. That's what's coming out as your essentially your product that makes it better than the person next to you, that sort of a thing. So going back into the BFS component, making sure that you know your definitions, your concept, that sort of a thing, and making sure you are able to calculate specific calculations such as formulas, or for example, when you're analyzing certain data and stuff like that, that you can do it with accuracy and within a certain time. This is really going to test on your time management skills and your time pressuring skills. Like the recommendation I can give to people is practice on your time pressuring skills, because although you could do, you know, analyze like a piece of data from a financial statement, that sort of thing, you could do it, but it might take you an hour to get it done and stuff like that. I'm mindful that you only have 15 minutes to get it done. So working on it, practicing it, knowing your calculations off by heart. This goes for accounting and financial services, making sure you know these calculations off by heart, that you can do them quickly, because within that 15 minutes, before you know it, if you only did the calculations and you didn't do your recommendations, then you're going to have some trouble. But now going into the management component, the marketing component, very quickly before I move on to the next portion, which is the conclusion. For the marketing component, the management components, when you're developing recommendations, obviously in this case, there isn't really one answer. There's always going to be millions of answers. In this case, when we always mention it to delegates as well too, the exec team as well, you need to make sure that when you develop your recommendations and stuff like that, you need to be creative. You need to make sure that it's not going to be the same old. It's not going to be the mainstream or the same pathway. Make sure it's nothing that the next guy next to you is going to say, or the person behind you is going to say the same thing. Because I guarantee you, for example, if you're going to take social media, like if you're going to develop a social media campaign for a marketing management case or whatever, be mindful that obviously social media is a big thing. If you're going to say social media, the next 100 people behind you are definitely going to say social media. So in order for you to set yourself apart, you really need to explain to your judge, what's the point of the social media? Why are you using it? And then after you explain why you're using your social media, explain to them your actual usage of it. So what makes it unique? How are you going to use the social media channels to kind of set yourself apart from the person next to you, that sort of a thing. So taking, for example, if you're developing a social media campaign for a certain situation, okay, I'm going to be using Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat to kind of get my word across, that sort of a thing. Try to do some viral marketing, if you remember from marketing class in first year. Also, you're trying to expand on your brand awareness, that sort of a thing. Whatever the case may be, you can explain to them. But at that point, most of the people behind you have already said at least that. Okay, I'm doing Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Okay, I'm trying to expand on my brand awareness, that sort of a thing. Now is the part where you need to start getting creative. How are you going to develop a marketing campaign? And in this case, obviously, social media is about gaining a lot of likes, but also getting a lot of attention. So how are you going to develop a creative solution that will get people to come to your pages and stuff like that, right? So you can talk about obviously a hashtag campaign. Obviously, you can do a contest or sort of thing, but also be mindful that even saying that, the other people are going to say the same thing. So now you really need to start thinking way beyond the box. I've kind of mentioned this to other delegates. I always say this myself. Don't always think outside the box. Look at that sphere like literally a meter away, right? You're not looking for what's outside the box. You're looking for something that's way out there that only you are probably going to find. That's how you know you're going to be able to set yourself apart from everyone else when you're when you're saying your recommendation to the judges, right? So obviously saying the hashtag campaign, it's just the baseline in terms of how you're going to be able to get your marketing campaign to be creative. What are you really going to do that would really get people to really look back at your page, to really get yourself involved, and to kind of think about it, put yourself in their shoes. What would you do in your campaign that will actually get them to actually share this information, to get them to say, hey, take a look at this. This is amazing, or whatever the case may be. You need to really show your creativity in this, because just saying using social media, for example, isn't enough and stuff like that. Moving along from the social media, developing recommendations for the marketing categories and stuff like that. Once again, it's just being creative, making sure that your ideas are not always the same old, the same mainstream type of thing. You need to be creative. You need to be able to make sure that your ideas will definitely stand apart from everyone else. But once again, mentioning from the first session, regardless of what category you're doing, any recommendations you're offering to your judge needs to be A, scalable in a way that can be repeated eventually later on. It can be developed from as well too. And number two, it has to be practical as well too. A lot of people love to make huge types of social media campaigns and recommendations that, for example, it's just practically impossible when they're trying to offer. For example, if you're trying to make a social media campaign for a very small business, we're talking about, let's say, 10 people or something like that, and you're trying to do a huge marketing campaign, like you're trying to get, for example, a production company trying to create an amazing advertisement or amazing campaign, and in the end, it's going to cost you $500,000. Do you think a small business would really need that? Do you think a small business would really need $500,000 to half a million dollars to spend, let alone to develop this marketing campaign? Like, it has to be practical, has to be within reasonable limits in the specific case or in real life scenarios, for example. So obviously, going back to the types of organization you should do, make sure it's scalable, it is practical, and also mention the cost. A lot of people have missed this, even though certain cases don't require you to put some sort of cost in. And this is why I mentioned earlier about the BSing component. In some cases, for example, marketing cases, stuff like that, you will need to mention some sort of number, some sort of cost. For example, if you're doing a marketing campaign and stuff, not only you need to explain is it practical, scalable, not only need to mention your timeline of how you'll be able to develop this, you need to mention how much it's going to cost, and in the end, how much is it going to generate, or what kind of return on investment will you receive from this. Most people forget these sort of things, and a lot of judges are looking for these things because, once again, think about it. Campaigns, all the stuff that you're doing is going to cost you money and time and capital. So how much is it going to cost? How is it really going to affect the company in terms of, you know, developing this and maintaining costs, right? So if you can try to kind of research specific campaigns, specific things out there that are part of your recommendation you might plan, try to figure out average cost or the typical cost that you see out there being used and stuff like that. Or try to make up a number, once again, using the BSing component, making up numbers that are also reasonable, that make sense in this case. Use it in there and explain this to the judge. Okay, for example, this marketing campaign or this thing we're going to be doing is going to cost X amount of money, and then going into detail of why it's going to cost us money and what's it going to be used for, and what kind of return, once again, what kind of return you're going to receive from this. Because regardless of what campaign you're doing, regardless of what you're doing, there's got to be some sort of return on investment. You're going to have to get something back. It doesn't have to necessarily be money. It could be Facebook likes. It could be increased brand awareness, increased market share. Doesn't matter. You need to make sure that you're receiving something back in return. So now putting this all together, so the intro, when you're doing a case presentation, your intro, obviously your GNAP, that sort of thing, blah, 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 and then briefly mentioning your agenda, and then going into explaining your recommendation to your judge, incorporating the key performance indicators as well too, and also trying to hit the performance indicator on your case itself, as we mentioned on the first session. You don't have to explain the performance indicators, but you have to make sure that your recommendations, your ideas relate to your performance indicators. And now finally, we're going to mention about conclusion. Most students always ask this question. Most students always ask, how can I really end my presentation? How can I really end it? Literally. So essentially, the way it works is that once you finished explaining your recommendation, basically just say, to wrap, not necessarily to say it, but don't say wrap things up. Don't say in conclusion, because it sounds kind of cheesy. Once again, as I mentioned in the first session, make sure when you present your case, it has some sort of a flow. Hence the reason why you should always develop an agenda when you explain things, and then making sure your intro, all that stuff flows. So in terms of the conclusion, just make sure that you're going to say, in summary, for example, something better than in conclusion, because that sounds kind of cheesy. That sounds kind of bland. Just say like, okay, in summary, or just to quickly recap as well too, or just saying, I believe my ideas are the best ideas, and that I know it's going to be able to gain you sales and gain you market share and everything, and then go ahead and retell your recommendation. Now, but when you're retelling your conclusion, think about it. Most students in grade 10, you might remember this. When you're developing an essay, you have a pyramid. Essentially, I'm just trying to remember from grade 10, some sort of a pyramid that you have here. So essentially, your problem, that sort of a thing, and you're kind of going down. In this case, when you're doing grade 10, an essay, it's kind of the thesis. In this case, is your solution, and in the end, there is your recommendation. And then when you're going in conclusion, you're kind of branching it back out. So retelling your solution, how it solves a problem, obviously going back into your recommendations, and also explain once again how your recommendations A solves your problem that you're trying to solve, and how, and B, how it relates to your solution. Once again, these recommendations have to have some sort of meaning, right? And obviously these recommendations has to solve your ultimate problem in the first place. You can't just throw any recommendations out. It has to solve your problem in the first place. And obviously you have to relate it back to your solutions, because it has to, once again, not only a flow, but it has to make sense, has to be practical. As you remember from the first session, as I'm explaining it right now, if you listen carefully and you also think about it, when you're developing your recommendation or even explain it, you can kind of see there's some sort of flow. There's also some sort of a structure, not a fixed structure, but some sort of structure when you're going in and kind of developing your recommendation, stuff like that. There's always a flow. There's always something that will lead you into kind of giving it the best case presentation ever, essentially like that. So once you sit down and think about it, you kind of know already. So in conclusion, obviously that sort of a thing, you know, putting the conclusions in, and then obviously let's just say that my recommendation is this and this and this. Then give some sort of a positive note saying that if you take in my recommendation and stuff like that, or you implement these recommendations, I am 100%, or I guarantee you, or make it something enthusiastic. Use a little bit of a self pitching in there, saying that if you take in my ideas, if you say my ideas are the best idea, well, not necessarily being a bit cocky, but just saying if you take in my recommendations, you're definitely going to see an increase in market share. You're going to be able to turn a lot of revenue for the company. You're going to bring this company into success, that sort of thing. Turn it to something that will lead it to something positive, right? Because you want to be able to sell your idea and use your little sales pitch in you and say, take my idea. My idea is better than the guy next to me and the guys behind me and stuff like that. And once you're absolutely done, always put in at the end, just say, thank you so much for giving me your time. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask? And in this case, that's kind of the end of your portion of your presentation. Now, in all cases, regardless if it's in the provincial conference as well as the invitational conference as well too, there will always be a set question or a few set questions that the judges will eventually ask you. Now, in the case, in their judges sheet, they will ask you those questions that are related back to the case. They might sound general in some sense, but these questions are in a way to test you that you're kind of number one, you know what you're talking about in a sense, right? So the BSing component, you can't necessarily just BS anything. It's to the point that you don't even know what you're talking about, right? Because a lot of judges, they are actually industry professionals, and they can really call your bluff if anything. So that's why, as I mentioned earlier about the BSing portion, if you are going to BS something, either in your recommendation as you're thinking of it when you're presenting, or in your answers when you're getting your questions from your judges, be mindful that you should be able to back up those answers, not only from your recommendations that you've built during your preparation time, but also based on your personal knowledge, and it relates into the industry as well too. So you have to be mindful of that. So when the judges ask you your questions, they're going to be sometimes general questions that's already been set. Just be able to answer them as your best of your abilities. Now, a lot of people have asked this question. They always ask, what if I blank out? What if I don't know the questions? I don't want to say, I don't know the question. Can we skip or whatever? And to be honest, you don't ever say that. When you ever dealt with a question like that, don't ever say, I don't know the question, or say next question, or just whatever. You just need in a way to kind of bend your way out of it. And if you're nervous about it, don't be afraid to be nervous, but try to control it. But if you're nervous, it's okay. The judges know already that you're nervous in a way. They can kind of tell by your body language, by the way you're speaking, the way you're presenting yourself. So really, the judges know in a way that you're nervous, but be mindful that like I said earlier, you want to show confidence, but also at the same time, if you don't know a question, just kind of bend it in a way. Just say, sorry, could you just repeat the question? Just kind of pretend you didn't hear in a way, but just say that, oh, can you just repeat the question? Or if you feel like if you need some small little words to help you pause and think, you can say, Oh, that is an excellent question. Well, maybe not necessarily an excellent question, but to just say, that's a very great question you posed to me. As you're saying it, you can kind of quickly think of something to answer the question, or ultimately, if you can't think of the question, an answer for that question particularly, you can kind of retell your recommendation that you've prepared during your 15-minute or 30-minute preparation. You can kind of just mention, oh wait, okay, just retelling in a way, what I mentioned, this isn't this and that. I mean, in a way, you might not answer the question, but it's better than giving no answer, or better than saying I don't know the question, or I don't really want to answer this, or that sort of a thing, right? But also at the same time, it really depends in certain cases. Sometimes they're not allowed to. In this case, sometimes judges will ask you questions that are outside the preset questions. Now, they're not going to be tough questions that they're going to really nail you on, that sort of a thing. They're mainly questions that they're taking their own personal knowledge, their own personal experience, and kind of posing it towards yourself, to make sure that you not only you understand the specific industry, that you know what you're talking about, but they're also trying to help you develop your brain and developing your analytical skills. They're trying to help you in a way, because once again, during the networking session, you have the opportunity to meet the judges if they're there as well too, right? But in this case, when you're being asked questions that are outside the preset questions, they're trying to help you in a way. Once again, try to answer it as best as you can. There may not be a set answer, that sort of thing, but try your best to answer the question to the best of your abilities as well too. So in terms of the presentation, that's essentially how you be able to kind of put your presentation together. So obviously your intro should take about 30 seconds. The agenda should take about a minute. And then the body of your presentation should be your recommendations that you developed. Um, Once again, when doing your recommendations, make sure they're practical, scalable. You mentioned some sort of cost and timeline of how they're going to be done. And obviously, when you're explaining to your recommendation, how will they relate back to your problem, and how they relate to the solution as well in terms of solving the problem. Make sure you have some sort of flow for that. And then when you're talking about your conclusion, just explain, oh, in summary, and or just say that if we do blah 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 blah, alternative A, B, or C, for example, and C, for example, we're going to be able to increase our sales. You're going to get an amazing return on investment. Make sure you sell your idea, because, like I said, you want to make sure that your idea is better than the guy next to you or the person next to you. We've mentioned that when we have spoken with delegates and when they ask these sort of questions, it's kind of bringing out your sales pitch in you. And then in the end, you finish it off with, thank you so much for giving me your time. Do you have any questions and stuff like that? Oh, this just popped in my mind. Once the judge has finished asking your questions, they're going to give you some sort of a cue. They're going to say thank you. At that point, when you finish, stand up and kind of repeat the beginning of your intro in a way, in terms of handshaking and saying thank you. So once you're finished, the judge thanks you and stuff like that. Shake your hand. Once again, the two handshakes, the not the limp handshakes, the confident handshake. Shake their hand and say, thank you so much for giving me your time, or say, have an excellent day, or have an amazing day, have a great day, that sort of thing, right? And at that point, walk out. Walk out with your head up high. No matter how bad your idea is, no matter how tough the judge is, how much they will nail you, you got to walk out with your head held up high, because number one, you finished your case presentation. Feel good about it. And number two, be confident when you walk out that door, because you might overthink it. Sometimes a judge might seem very hard on you, and you never know that your idea could be the best idea, and then before you know it, they're calling your name up to go and get your medal and your placement, that sort of thing. So be confident in when you're presenting your case and stuff like that. Now, I want to be also to mention about the presentation in terms of teams as well too. Very quickly, I've mentioned it in the first session, so I'm not going to go too much into detail. So you can take a look at the video as well too in that case. But when you're doing a team presentation, just make sure that you guys are talking as one big team and not two separate people. Myself, Parisa, and the other executives and the mentors as well have trained people, and they've kind of noticed, definitely myself, we've kind of noticed sometimes teams, when they present kind of like two separate people, like two heads rather than one body in a way, right? And we've always mentioned this in the beginning, like we're not trying to discourage people who are trying to do teams, but we always mention to delegates saying that if you're going to be doing teams, be mindful that this is not like, you can choose your friend, you can choose anyone, or you can choose, like most people will always choose your friend, but be mindful that this is work. When your friends, or when you pick you and your friend to be in the team category, and when you're doing your case and stuff like that, just be mindful that it's not fun stuff. It's not like, okay, we're going to be doing this and stuff like that. It's real work. Like you're going to be sitting down, you're going to be developing recommendations, you're analyzing a case, like you're really putting your brain to work. And in a way, it comes out naturally. They kind of come out as two separate brains anyways, because you have one person who has one idea and another person has another idea, and you're trying to kind of come to some sort of agreement, some sort of a conclusion. And that's where the problems begin when you're doing a team presentation. Most people struggle in this portion in the team's presentation because the fact that when they're developing or when they're doing their preparation, the fact that sometimes they always disagree with each other when an idea is presented to them. They're saying, for example, person A would say, I think we should do this idea. It's going to be really great. It's an amazing. And then person B just comes on and says, no, we can't do this idea. It's not a great idea. It's not going to work. It's not practical. It's blah, 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 right? Sometimes they don't even know it. They could be arguing and bickering for 5 minutes. And before you know it, you just killed 5 minutes. Right. And just to mention again as well too, even though there's no timer as well too, as I mentioned in the first session, there's going to be someone there who's going to explain to you and tell you that how many minutes you have remaining. So they're going to give you some sort of a signal saying you have 5 minutes to go, 3 minutes to go, 2 minutes to go. That's the only way you'll know how much time you have left, but you have no timer. But going back to the team component, what I mentioned, yeah, you guys need to make sure that you guys are working together, not working as two heads, but as one big body, one team, because you guys want to be able to have some sort of a flow when you're also presenting as well too, right? So when you're presenting to your judge, make sure make sure you guys are not presenting, as I mentioned, not two heads, but one big team, right? Have some sort of a flow. So if you have the opportunity before the provincial conference next week, get together with your partner, kind of practice how you guys are going to be able to speak, how you guys are going to be handing off each other in terms of idea, what they're going to say, that sort of everything. Bottom line is when you're telling your stuff and your recommendation, make sure you guys have sort of a 50-50 kind of role in the play. Or in the presentation in this case, right? And the analyzing of the case as well too, right? Make sure one person doesn't take precedence over another person. Make sure that one person doesn't lead the other person, right? It's a two-person team. It means you're working together. One person doesn't lead another. You're working as one. That's what you need to be mindful when you're doing a team category. And we get this question a lot from everyone. So be mindful of that as well too. So to quickly wrap things up, as I mentioned about the presentation, if you want to go into detail or if you want to go kind of review what I just said, you can always go back into the video. It's going to be posted on YouTube, obviously, just slightly edited in terms of the beginning portion, but you can always go back and view the video again in terms of how to do the presentation as well too, and a little bit of the team. And also on the first video, we did mention about how to analyze a case, how to kind of be able to tackle a case, how to develop a recommendation. It's also in the beginning of this video, but also on the first session as well too. So to wrap things up very quickly, I'm going to try to answer any questions that you guys may have posted from the beginning or as well as during this call and stuff like that. So we have a delegate here is asking about, they want me to go through a specific case, a specific format and follow an order to solve it. Okay, I will try my best to answer this question. I know a lot of people are asking if you can go in a way to kind of figure out a way how we can solve a specific case and everything. And be mindful that there are different cases as well too, case categories. I will try my best at the point. I might have answered it during this video, but I'll try my best to answer the question in terms of clusters and specific marketing areas. Now, let's see if I have time to go for a specific case. Oh yeah, this just popped in my head. In terms of answering that question, going through an actual specific case, I wouldn't be able to actually go into a case right now, pull it up and go through it together. I cannot do this publicly because the case itself is considered to be a copyrighted material. And as per regulations of Deca-Ugh and even through the Google's terms and conditions, I am not allowed to post any copyrighted materials on this call. So as I mentioned in the first session and everything, we're allowed to do this. If you want to request a case to look over and eventually meet up with any of the executive members or as well as a mentor of our chapter, we can definitely go through it together, the specific case that you've received and stuff like that. But you can definitely email us at decaugh@guelph and we can definitely send you a specific case from a category, and we'll try to choose ones that are from not necessarily from last year, but from at least a few years back, or something very interesting based on your your skill level and stuff like that. But unfortunately, I'm not gonna be able to kind of go through a specific case itself based off the copyright issue as well too. But if you want to get a specific case itself, don't be afraid to email us, and we'll definitely send you a case. We can't really send you a whole bunch of cases, at least one or two at a time. We can't publicly distribute it. That's the bottom line. We can't really do that. But in terms of answering this question, I'll try my best in terms of answering it. The second portion was this delegate one is wondering if they can explain a specific format in order to solve a case. I'll try to reiterate what I mentioned earlier in this call. See if I missed anything on the case as well too. Oh yes, some tips and some techniques that you guys can definitely use, regardless if you're doing an accounting case, a marketing case, or that sort of thing. Try to use specific business concepts, as I mentioned earlier, when you're doing even finance or accounting. Generalized concepts as well too. So as you guys may know already, you've learned Porter's five forces, you learned PEST, you learned the gap analysis, the BCG matrix, a market perception gap. Use a lot of these concepts, because in the end as well, these judges and the case itself is also trying to test on your academic skills as well. That's why we always mention, and we've always explained this in the beginning, particularly from our kickoff session, that the best thing about DECA is that it takes a lot of the stuff that you learned from school, for example, the Porter's five forces, that sort of thing, etc. You're taking this into analyzing your case, but as well, you're also taking your own personal kind of a touch, your own personal creativity into developing your recommendation. And that's how we always explain that although you're using business concepts into your case, your personal creativity is what really sets yourself apart from everyone else. So yes, don't forget to use concepts like Porter's five forces, PEST, gap, stuff like that. And as I mentioned in the first session, don't really explain these concepts into details. Number one, because you only have 10 or 15 minutes to present, that's really unnecessary. You're just wasting time on that, because the judges know exactly what these concepts, they've gone to school like us. Okay, so you don't have to really go through it in detail. And number two, it's just really saying that the judges don't really know it. Once again, as I mentioned, they know these stuff already, so you don't have to go into detail. You can briefly explain, like in 5 seconds or 3 seconds, what they really are, right? But don't go into detail about it. But just explain how you're using this concept. For example, if you're using Porter's five forces, that if you explain how it relates to the case, or what are the Porter's five forces in relations in this case, and how do they really relate, number one, to your recommendations, but also solving the problem and the solution, right? It has to tie in, has to have some sort of a flow, right? So using these concepts, make sure they are useful, and making sure they're relevant, obviously, and making sure that you are relating it back to the case content itself as well. Let's see if I'm trying to answer any other questions. If there's anything I might have missed, we can always go back into our first video as well too. You can always shoot us an email at decaugh.ca, message us on Facebook directly. You can always search up our names, and we'll definitely answer your questions as best as we can. Stop us in the hallway next week, since it's the first week of school. Sorry guys to ruin it, your vacation time, but it is the first week of school next week. Stop us in the hallway. Try to talk to us. Try to stop us as soon as you can. Earlier the better. Be way before the provincial conference, because I know a lot of people are going to have questions about it. And don't be afraid to ask any questions, even if you have any last minute questions, particularly at the provincial itself. Like, here's a recommendation I always offer to students, and a lot of students need to really understand about this. When you're at the DECA conference, the provincial conference, yes, there's going to be fun, but the fun's going to be at the end. First things, when you get there on the Friday, not only when you drop your bags off, drop your stuff off, after the dinner and stuff like that, you guys got to get started on preparing your cases, or preparing what you're going to say, develop ideas that you could use to in the specific cases and when you're doing your presentation, or just transfer into it. Use your Friday night not as fun as some students unfortunately do. Sometimes they go out and they party on the Friday night when they know they have their case. Sometimes 8:30 in the morning. Actually, there are cases, the presentation flights at 8:30. So once again, all this information will be posted within the week as soon as we get them. in terms of what time your flight is, and they're also going to be on your name badge when you arrive at the provincial conference as well too. But be mindful that some people will have their case flights at 8:30 or way in the morning, so you don't want to be partying the night before, getting a hangover. I'm not going to really say it, but I'll say it now. Getting a hangover, that sort of a thing, and you can't do your case. Don't worry about the fun. The fun will come later on. Focus on the case itself, because you're here for the skill building and the actual case presentation. So take the Friday night to start developing ideas that you could use in the case. There's nothing wrong with developing it beforehand and using it in your case, but start getting yourself ready. Start practicing, start training yourself prior to, just a last minute thing, right? Some people might not want to do that, and that's fine. If you feel like you're ready or you feel like you don't need to do these things, that's fine. But I don't recommend you go and party on the Friday night, because you got the Saturday night to do it, right? But use the Friday nights into something useful and into something that's productive as well too. So be mindful of that as well too. So that's what I recommend as well too. But also, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to stop us as soon as you can. Speak to us, message us, anything like that as well too. Um, so enough of the actual training component. I'm going to answer as well to some of the questions that many of the students have actually emailed us, have actually talked about in terms of this whole provincial stuff. And I'm going to answer as best I can. And once again, there's going to be more communication as well. As I mentioned in the first session, there's going to be a guide to provincials pamphlet or some booklet that we launched last year, and we had great response, and we're going to release it again this year. And essentially what it is that it's a booklet in conjunction with the delegate package that Deca-Ugh has released, but all this information is relevant to Deca-Ugh GH delegates. So how to get there, what can we expect on the Friday, what can we expect on the check-in, that sort of a thing. All that information is going to be there, and obviously we're going to answer as best as we can, but we're going to try to eliminate any questions. For example, how do I get to the hotel from school? That's going to be definitely answered in the booklet. But if there's any specific questions you ask, and once again, my phone number, Michael Prasad's phone number, and eventually later on in other communications, we can throw the other executives' numbers on there. Our numbers in our communications will be there. We will try our best to answer it as quick as we can, day off or prior to, or even during the whole weekend. But we will try our best. All of our numbers and emails are going to be there. So if any emergencies or anything you want to send us and shoot us, it'll all be there. So the most important part, I hope not a lot of people left from this call, but the most important part is this multiple choice test this Friday and Saturday, actually tomorrow and Saturday. The multiple choice test, the way it works is that you'll need to be on campus to do this multiple choice testing. Now, unfortunately, you can't do this at home, because as this test is proctored by a specific software that Deca-Ugh is using, if the system detects you doing your test outside of the campus, even if I've only provided this, and I'm only going to provide this information on campus. I will not be providing the login information, the passwords, all that stuff. I will not be providing that over the email and stuff like that, given the reason that they're going to be students who are going to do this outside. And it doesn't really make sense anyways. But if in the case this information does get spread outside of the campus and someone attempts to do it outside, the system will know, because they will know it from your IP address, and they're going to flag it automatically, and you will receive a 0 on this case. Another question I've received many times from other delegates, and not just from our chapter, but from every chapter across Ontario, because once again, we're still in the winter vacation. So there are a lot of people who are outside the country or traveling. Many of the people have asked this question. I'm outside the country. I can't do the multiple choice testing. What can I do? If there's something I can do to really allow you to do the testing, I would definitely do it. Honestly, I want to make sure that all the delegates going into this competition have the best. Unfortunately, this test is done by Deca-Ugh. It's completely out of my control, and this test is meant to be equal and meant to be standardized across all the chapters across Ontario. Unfortunately, if you're out of the country and can't do the tests, you will receive a 0. I really apologize for that, and this is out of my control. It just has to be done within this time frame, this time period that they have told us to do it. We have to do it within this time frame. Also explain the time and when the multiple choice is going to be done. So unfortunately, to the people who haven't, who are outside the country, unfortunately, I can't really do anything about it. And most students, not just yourself, students from other chapters have asked this question, and you're going to have to receive a 0, unfortunately. The thing is that, yes, once you've done, when you're going to do your multiple choice testing, it has to be done on campus. It has to be done on the computers at school. The IP addresses that the system will detect, they'll know it's from school. And if you do it outside, it's going to flag you. Now, we recommend everyone to come within a certain same period of time and stuff like that to also prevent the system from flagging you. So let's say if you're doing it by yourself at this one point, um, hopefully it shouldn't flag you, because I really don't believe it should flag you if you're doing it by yourself, even on campus. But we recommend students to do it in one great group so the system won't flag you, that sort of thing. The last thing you want to do is to get flagged and get a 0. We want to make sure that everyone gets an excellent overall score, that sort of a thing. When you're doing the multiple choice testing, this is what you're going to expect. So any students who are going to come by tomorrow or by Saturday, those are the only 2 days we can do it. We cannot do it in any other days as well too, because it's based off the availability that they have given to us from Deca-Ugh, but also the availability of booking the rooms on campus. So these are the only 2s that we can get. So basically, the multiple choice testing is going to be very similar to last year's for any delegates who have attended provincials last year's. It's going to be a drop-in session. So it means you can come in and do your tests amongst the other students as well too. Obviously, you have to do it individually, and we're not going to tell you to look at each other's screen, not at all. But you guys are going to be doing it together in the same room, that sort of thing. Once you arrive, oh, sorry, I have to give you the time actually. The time is going to be anywhere between 9 a.m. and 7 p.m. on the Friday and the Saturday. On the Friday from 9 a.m. to 3:30, you should have seen this on your email. From 9 a.m. to 3:30, we're going to be at the Old Math Center, GH202, the new silent study hall. Most people think that it's just a study room, but most of the students don't know that once you get it booked and we have access to the podium, the computers actually come out from the desk. So we're going to get everyone to do their multiple choice testing, and it's going to be really nice. A lot of students haven't seen it, but I'll tell you right now, it's going to be really cool. So from 9 a.m. to 3:30, that's when we have the room booked at the Math Center. We're going to be doing it there. From 3:30 on until 7 p.m., we're going to get everyone to, or anyone who's going to be doing at this time, will be doing it at a computer lab. We don't really have a computer lab booked, but because the fact that school hasn't started yet, there's not going to be many students, so we shouldn't have an issue with that to begin with. Excuse me. So we're going to be doing it either GH2 321 or 322. Only the one room. We're not going to be doing 2 separate rooms, because we have to make sure we proctor your exams. We have to see you do your exam and you don't cheat, unfortunately. Okay, that's what I have to say. But we want to make sure that you guys don't cheat. So on the Saturday as well too, it's also going to be in either one of the computer labs, either GH321 or 322. It's also going to be from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. as well too. When you arrive in the specific assigned rooms for your multiple choice test, this is what you're going to expect. So when you arrive at the day of and at the place where you're going to be doing your testing, the exec team, not everyone will be there, but there's going to be at least someone from the exec team will be there to assist you to get yourself logged in to do the testing. Essentially, all the information of how to log in and do the testing will be obviously on the whiteboard or wherever the case may be. It will be provided on the day of and on the actual site. We will not provide this through email. We will not provide this elsewhere, because we want to prevent students from doing it outside the campus. And yes, even though if I provide it, it wouldn't really matter, because if you do it outside the campus, you will receive a 0 because the system will flag you. But otherwise, when you come in, what you will expect is all the information you need to do your multiple choice testing, such as your login and the passwords, and to get yourself started. Multiple choice testing is done individually. This includes team categories. You're not going to be doing the test together as one team. You're going to be doing it as 2 separate people. However, when you're doing the scoring, as I mentioned in the first session, you're going to be scored based off your average up to 2 scores together. And that's one team multiple choice scoring. So obviously you have the first oral case presentation and your multiple choice, which is the average of the 2, and then your overall, which is the average of the other 2, the case and the multiple choice. In the case of individuals, you have your 2 oral presentations and your multiple choice and your overall, which is the other 3 as well too. For people who are supposed to be doing the multiple choice testing, they are only for delegates who are competing in individual categories, team categories, and anyone competing in the quiz bowl competition. Anyone in special categories, for example, I know Case Boss does not exist for this year. Anyone doing Case Boss has received an email from Deca-Ugh that has been merged with PMI. They're calling it some new category. But anyways, anyone doing special categories like the PMI, the project management, and the advertising campaign, stuff like that, you guys are not required to do a multiple choice. You guys don't have to come in on the Friday and the Saturday, but you can come in if you want to receive any trainings or you want to speak to us in person. But you guys are not required to do the multiple choice testing. Only individuals, categories, team categories, as well as anyone competing in the quiz bowl category will need to do this multiple choice testing. So when you come in, when you do the testing, it should take about an hour and a half on average. Actually, they only give you about, oh, sorry, not an hour and a half, an hour. From previous experience, some have said that's an hour and a half, some sort of thing. But I believe they only give you 1 hour. That was the case last year. They're going to give it to you this year. So you only have 1 hour to answer about, I'm going to say about 80 to 100 multiple choice questions. I know right now I can kind of guess most people are freaking out. Man, I only have an hour to do a multiple choice question, and they're generalized question. The tip is, I guess in this case, I know we try to offer some sort of content for students to kind of review in terms of the multiple choice. We couldn't find it. It used to be on the Deca-Ugh website when you logged into your profile under student resources. They have removed this access for some weird reason. But normally it's just testing on general skills, general business knowledge, as I mentioned in the first session. So really try the best you can. If anyone has problems doing the test itself, we will assist you on trying to any technical components, but we can't really help you in terms of answering questions and stuff like that. We'll try our best to help you in terms of the multiple choice testing wise, but not answering the questions for you, unfortunately. Best option is try as best as you can. Try to research as much as you can in terms of general knowledge, because some of the questions also relate to business situations from today and stuff like that. So that's what you can expect in the types of questions for multiple choice. You'll probably get 1 hour, because I think they haven't told me a specific time, but most cases always 1 hour to do the test. And after you're done the test, you are free to go. You guys are free to do whatever you want for the weekend, the last weekend before school. But if you guys want to hang out, stay behind, asking us any questions about provincials, any sort of training and stuff like that, we'll try our best to kind of train and everything like that. But you guys can stay behind if you guys want. If once you're done, you guys can leave and stuff like that. And then we'll provide you more information in terms of the provincials and stuff like that. So that's what you can expect for the multiple choice testing. Once again, I have sent the email out. I will be sending out another email tonight to remind people about the testing and to remind people about how it works and stuff like that. And I will only provide the information in terms of how to log in, that sort of a thing. Only A, on the day off, and only B, on the site. I will not be providing this on email or Facebook, Twitter, anything like that, because I don't want, well, it's not that I don't want people doing it outside. There's no point, because if you attempt to, you do it, you will receive a 0 because the system will flag you. Answering other questions. Yes, training. A lot of delegates ask about training as well too. So yes, as we just did, and from the first session on Tuesday and today, these are general training questions. I know people have the option to join, but you have the option to also review this video by playing it back on our YouTube channel. You can search us up on Deca-Ugh as well too, and you can also view Wink Wink, our video from last year in provincials as well too. You can review this video on the go as well too, in case if you want to gain any sort of training advice and stuff like that. You can, it's on demand anyway. So in terms of getting additional training, we have a lot more training sessions, particularly one-on-one training sessions that you guys can set up with either a member of the executive team and a mentor as well too. We have amazing mentors that are either senior delegate, senior Deca-Ugh delegates who have won various awards and stuff like that, or some of them, or I believe we have one of them who is actually a GH alumni who just graduated recently. So, you know, these mentors are amazing. These guys are going to help you ensure that you guys are going to succeed and build your skills, right?